What's the implication of all this, Don Juan? The implication is that on crossing the second gate, you must intend a greater and more sober control over your dreaming attention, the only safety valve for dreamers. What is this safety valve? You will find out for yourself that the true goal of dreaming is to perfect the energy body. A perfect energy body, among other things, of course, has such a control over the dreaming attention that it makes it stop when needed. This is the safety valve dreamers have. No matter how indulging they might be, at a given time, their dreaming attention must make them surface. I started all over again on another dreaming quest. This time the goal was more elusive and the difficulty even greater. Exactly as with my first task, I could not begin to figure out what to do. I had the discouraging suspicion that all my practice was not going to be of much help this time. After countless failures, I gave up and settled down to simply continue my practice of fixing my dreaming attention on every item of my dreams. Accepting my shortcomings seemed to give me a boost, and I became even more adept at sustaining the view of any item in my dreams. A year went by without any change. Then one day, something changed. As I was watching a window in a dream, trying to find out if I could catch a glimpse of the scenery outside the room, some wind-like force, which I felt as a buzzing in my ears, pulled me through the window to the outside. Just before that pull, my dreaming attention had been caught by a strange structure some distance away. It looked like a tractor. The next thing I knew, I was standing by it, examining it. I was perfectly aware that I was dreaming. I looked around to find out if I could tell from what window I had been looking. The scene was that of a farm in the countryside. No buildings were in sight. I wanted to ponder this. However, the quantity of farm machinery lying around, as if abandoned, took all my attention. I examined mowing machines, tractors, grain harvesters, disc plows, thrashers. There were so many that I forgot my original dream. What I wanted then was to orient myself by watching the immediate scenery. There was something in the distance that looked like a billboard and some telephone poles around it. The instant I focused my attention on that billboard, I was next to it. The steel structure of the billboard gave me a fright. It was menacing. On the billboard itself was a picture of a building. I read the text. It was an advertisement for a motel. I had a peculiar certainty that I was in Oregon or Northern California. I looked for other features in the environment of my dream. I saw mountains very far away and some green, round hills not too far. On those hills were clumps of what I thought were California oak trees. I wanted to be pulled by the green hills, but what pulled me were the distant mountains. I was convinced that they were the Sierras. All my dreaming energy left me on those mountains. But before it did, I was pulled by every possible feature. My dream ceased to be a dream. As far as my capacity to perceive was concerned, I was veritably in the Sierras, zooming into ravines, boulders, trees, caves. I went from scarped faces to mountain peaks until I had no more drive and could not focus my dreaming attention on anything. I felt myself losing control. Finally, there was no more scenery, just darkness. You have reached the second gate of dreaming, Don Juan said, when I narrated my dream to him. What you should do next is to cross it. Crossing the second gate is a very serious affair. It requires a most disciplined effort. I was not sure I had fulfilled the task he outlined for me, because I had not really woken up in another dream. I asked Don Juan about this irregularity. "The mistake was mine," he said. "I told you that one has to wake up in another dream. But what I meant is that one has to change dreams in an orderly and precise manner, the way you have done it. With the first gate, you wasted a lot of time looking exclusively for your hands. This time, you went directly to the solution without bothering to follow the given command, to wake up in another dream." Don Juan said that there are two ways of properly crossing the second gate of dreaming. One is to wake up in another dream. That is to say, to dream that one is having a dream, and then dream that one wakes up from it. The alternative is to use the items of a dream to trigger another dream, exactly as I had done. Just as he had been doing all along, Don Juan let me practice without any interference on his part, and I corroborated the two alternatives he described. Either I dreamt that I was having a dream from which I dreamt I woke up, or I zoomed from a definite item accessible to my immediate dreaming attention to another one, not quite accessible. Or I entered into a slight variation of the second. I gazed at any item of a dream, maintaining the gaze until the item changed shape, and by changing shape, pulled me into another dream through a buzzing vortex. Never was I capable, however, of deciding beforehand which of the three I would follow. My dreaming practices always ended by my running out of dreaming attention and finally waking up, or by my falling into dark, deep slumber. Everything went smoothly in my practices. The only disturbance I had was a peculiar interference, a jolt of fear or discomfort I had begun to experience with increasing frequency. My way of discarding it was to believe that it was related to my ghastly eating habits, or to the fact that in those days, Don Juan was giving me a profusion of hallucinogenic plants as part of my training. Those jolts became so prominent, however, that I had to ask Don Juan's advice. "You have entered now into the most dangerous facet of the sorcerer's knowledge," he began. "It is sheer dread, a veritable nightmare. I could joke with you and say that I didn't mention the possibility to you out of regard for your cherished rationality, but I can't. Every sorcerer has to face it. Here is where I fear you might very well think you're going off the deep end." Don Juan very solemnly explained that life and consciousness, being exclusively a matter of energy, are not solely the property of organisms. He said that sorcerers have seen that there are two types of conscious beings roaming the earth, the organic and the inorganic, and that in comparing one with the other, they have seen that both are luminous masses crossed from every imaginable angle by millions of the universe's energy filaments. They are different from each other in their shape and in their degree of brightness. Inorganic beings are long and candle-like, but opaque. whereas organic beings are round and by far the brighter. Another noteworthy difference, which Don Juan said sorcerers have seen, is that the life and consciousness of organic beings is short-lived because they are made to hurry, whereas the life of inorganic beings is infinitely longer and their consciousness infinitely more calm and deeper. Sorcerers find no problem interacting with them. Don Juan went on. Inorganic beings possess the crucial ingredient for interaction: consciousness. But do these inorganic beings really exist? Like you and I exist? I asked. Of course they do, he replied. Believe me, sorcerers are very intelligent creatures. Under no condition would they toy with aberrations of the mind and then take them for real. Why do you say they are alive? For sorcerers, having life means having consciousness. It means having an assemblage point and its surrounding glow of awareness. A condition that points out to sorcerers that the being in front of them, organic or inorganic, is thoroughly capable of perceiving. Perceiving is understood by sorcerers as the precondition of being alive. Then the inorganic beings must also die. Is that true, Don Juan? Naturally, they lose their awareness just like we do, except that the length of their consciousness is staggering to the mind. Do these inorganic beings appear to sorcerers? It's very difficult to tell what is what with them. Let's say that those beings are enticed by us, or better yet, compelled to interact with us. Don Juan peered at me most intently. You're not taking in any of this at all, he said, with a tone of someone who has reached a conclusion. It's nearly impossible for me to think about this rationally, I said. I warned you that this subject will tax your reason. The proper thing to do then is to suspend judgment and let things take their course, meaning that you let the inorganic beings come to you. Are you serious, Don Juan? Deadly serious. The difficulty with inorganic beings is that their awareness is very slow in comparison with ours. It will take years for a sorcerer to be acknowledged by inorganic beings. So, it is advisable to have patience and wait. Sooner or later they show up, but not like you or I would show up. Theirs is a most peculiar way to make themselves known. How do sorcerers entice them? Do they have a ritual? Well, they certainly don't stand in the middle of the road and call out to them with trembling voices at the stroke of midnight, if that's what you mean. What do they do then? They entice them in dreaming. I said that what's involved is more than enticing them. By the act of dreaming, sorcerers compel those beings to interact with them. How do sorcerers compel them by the act of dreaming? Dreaming is sustaining the position where the assemblage point has shifted in dreams. This act creates a distinctive energy charge, which attracts their attention. It's like bait to fish. They'll go for it. Sorcerers, by reaching and crossing the first two gates of dreaming, set bait for those beings and compel them to appear. By going through the two gates, you have made your bidding known to them. Now you must wait for a sign from them. What would the sign be, Don Juan? possibly the appearance of one of them, although that seems too soon. I am of the opinion that their sign will be simply some interference in your dreaming. I believe that the jolts of fear you are experiencing nowadays are not indigestion, but energy jolts sent to you by the inorganic beings. What should I do? You must gauge your expectations. I could not understand what he meant, and he carefully explained that our normal expectation when engaging in interaction with our fellow men or with other organic beings is to get an immediate reply to our solicitation. With inorganic beings, however, since they are separated from us by a most formidable barrier, energy that moves at a different speed, sorcerers must gauge their expectations and sustain the solicitation for as long as it takes to be acknowledged. Do you mean, Don Juan, that the solicitation is the same as the dreaming practices? Yes, but for a perfect result, you must add to your practices the intent of reaching those inorganic beings. Send a feeling of power and confidence to them, a feeling of strength, of detachment. Avoid, at any cost, sending a feeling of fear or morbidity. They are pretty morbid by themselves. To add your morbidity to them is unnecessary, to say the least. I'm not clear, Don Juan, about the way they appear to sorcerers. What is the peculiar way they make themselves known? They do at times materialize themselves in the daily world, right in front of us. Most of the time, though, their invisible presence is marked by a bodily jolt, a shiver of sorts that comes from the marrow of the bones. What about in dreaming, Don Juan? In dreaming, we have the total opposite. At times, we feel them the way you are feeling them, as a jolt of fear. Most of the time, they materialize themselves right in front of us. Since at the beginning of dreaming, we have no experience whatsoever with them, they might imbue us with fear beyond measure. That is the real danger to us. Through the channel of fear, they can follow us to the daily world with disastrous results for us. In what way, Don Juan? Fear can settle down in our lives, and we would have to be mavericks to deal with it. Inorganic beings can be worse than a pest. Through fear, they can easily drive us raving mad. What do sorcerers do with inorganic beings? They mingle with them. They turn them into allies. They form associations, create extraordinary friendships. I call them vast enterprises, where perception plays the uppermost role. We are social beings. We unavoidably seek the company of consciousness. With inorganic beings, the secret is not to fear them, and this must be done from the beginning. The intent one has to send out to them has to be of power and abandon. In that intent, one must encode the message, I don't fear you. Come to see me. If you do, I'll welcome you. If you don't want to come, I'll miss you. With a message like this, they'll get so curious that they'll come for sure. Why should they come to seek me, or why on earth should I seek them? Dreamers, whether they like it or not, in their dreaming, seek associations with other beings. This may come to you as a shock, but dreamers automatically seek groups of beings, nexuses of inorganic beings in this case. Dreamers seek them avidly. This is very strange to me, Don Juan. Why would dreamers do that? The novelty for us is the inorganic beings. And the novelty for them is one of our kind, crossing the boundaries of their realm. The thing you must bear in mind from now on is that inorganic beings, with their superb consciousness, exert a tremendous pull over dreamers and can easily transport them into worlds beyond description. The sorcerers of antiquity used them, and they are the ones who coined the name allies. Their allies taught them to move the assemblage point out of the egg's boundaries into the non-human universe. So when they transport a sorcerer, they transport him to worlds beyond the human domain. As I heard him talk, I was plagued by strange fears and misgivings, which he promptly realized. "You are a religious man to the end," he laughed. "Now you're feeling the devil breathing down your neck." Think about dreaming in these terms. Dreaming is perceiving more than what we believe it is possible to perceive. In my waking hours, I worried about the possibility that inorganic conscious beings really existed. When I was dreaming, however, my conscious worries did not have much effect. The jolts of physical fear continued, but whenever they happened, a strange calmness always trailed behind. A calmness that took control of me and let me proceed as if I had no fear at all. It seemed at the time that every breakthrough in dreaming happened to me suddenly, without warning. The presence of inorganic beings in my dreams was no exception. It happened while I was dreaming about a circus I knew in my childhood. The setting looked like a town in the mountains of Arizona. I began to watch people with the vague hope I always had that I would see again the people I had seen the first time Don Juan made me enter into the second attention. As I watched them, I felt a sizable jolt of nervousness in the pit of my stomach. It was like a punch. The jolt distracted me, and I lost sight of the people, the circus, and the mountain town in Arizona. In their place stood two strange-looking figures. They were thin, less than a foot wide, but long, perhaps 7 feet. They were looming over me like two gigantic earthworms. I knew that it was a dream, but I also knew that I was seeing. Don Juan had discussed seeing in my normal awareness, and in the second attention as well. Although I was incapable of experiencing it myself, I thought I had understood the idea of directly perceiving energy. In that dream, looking at those two strange apparitions, I realized that I was seeing the energy essence of something unbelievable. I remained very calm. I did not move. The most remarkable thing to me was that they didn't dissolve or change into something else. They were cohesive beings that retained their candle-like shape. Something in them was forcing something in me to hold the view of their shape. I knew it because something was telling me that if I did not move, they would not move either. It all came to an end at a given moment, when I woke up with a fright. I was immediately besieged by fears. A deep preoccupation took hold of me. It was not psychological worry, but rather a bodily sense of anguish, sadness, with no apparent foundation. The two strange shapes appeared to me from then on in every one of my dreaming sessions. Eventually, it was as if I dreamt only to encounter them. They never attempted to move toward me or to interfere with me in any way. They just stood there, immobile, in front of me, for as long as my dream lasted. Not only did I never make any effort to change my dreams, but I even forgot the original quest of my dreaming practices. When I finally discussed with Don Juan what was happening to me, I had spent months solely viewing the two shapes. "You are stuck at a dangerous crossroad," Don Juan said. "It isn't right to chase these beings away, but it isn't right either to let them stay. For the time being, their presence is a hindrance to your dreaming." "What can I do, Don Juan?" "Face them right now in the world of daily life and tell them to come back later when you have more dreaming power." "How do I face them?" "It's not simple, but it can be done. It requires only that you have enough guts, which of course you do." Without waiting for me to tell him that I had no guts at all, he took me to the hills. He lived then in northern Mexico, and he had given me the total impression he was a solitary sorcerer, an old man forgotten by everybody, and completely outside the main current of human affairs. I had surmised, however, that he was intelligent beyond measure. And because of this, I was willing to comply with what I half believed were mere eccentricities. The cunningness of sorcerers, cultivated through the ages, was Don Juan's trademark. He made sure that I understood all I could in my normal awareness, and at the same time, he made sure that I entered into the second attention, where I understood, or at least passionately listened to everything he taught me. In this fashion, he divided me in two. In my normal consciousness, I could not understand why or how I was more than willing to take his eccentricities seriously. In the second attention, it all made sense to me. His contention was that the second attention is available to all of us, but by willfully holding on to our half-cocked rationality, some of us more fiercely than others keep the second attention at arm's length. His idea was that dreaming brings down the barriers that surround and insulate the second attention. The day he took me to the hills of the Sonoran Desert to meet the inorganic beings, I was in my normal state of awareness. Yet somehow I knew I had to do something that was certainly going to be unbelievable. It had rained lightly in the desert. The red dirt was still wet, and as I walked, it got clumped up in the rubber soles of my shoes. I had to step on rocks to remove the heavy chunks of dirt. We walked in an easterly direction, climbing toward the hills. When we got to a narrow gully between two hills, Don Juan stopped. "This is for sure an ideal place to summon your friends," he said. "Why do you call them my friends?" "They have singled you out themselves. When they do that, it means that they seek an association. I've mentioned to you that sorcerers form bonds of friendship with them. Your case seems to be an example, and you don't even have to solicit them. What does such a friendship consist of, Don Juan? It consists of a mutual exchange of energy. The inorganic beings supply their high awareness, and sorcerers supply their heightened awareness and high energy. The positive result is an even exchange. The negative one is dependency on both parties. The old sorcerers used to love their allies. In fact, they loved their allies more than they loved their own kind. I can foresee terrible dangers in that. What do you recommend I do, Don Juan? Summon them, size them up, and then decide yourself what to do. What should I do to summon them? Hold your dream view of them in your mind. The reason they have saturated you with their presence in your dreams is that they want to create a memory of their shape in your mind. And this is the time to use that memory. Don Juan forcefully ordered me to close my eyes and keep them closed. Then he guided me to sit down on some rocks. I felt the hardness and the coldness of the rocks. The rocks were slanted. It was difficult to keep my balance. Sit here and visualize their shape until they are just like they are in your dreams, Don Juan said in my ear. Let me know when you have them in focus. It took me very little time and effort to have a complete mental picture of their shape, just like in my dreams. It did not surprise me at all that I could do it. What shocked me was that, although I tried desperately to let Don Juan know I had pictured them in my mind, I could not voice my words or open my eyes. I was definitely awake. I could hear everything. I heard Don Juan say, "You can open your eyes now." I opened them with no difficulty. I was sitting cross-legged on some rocks, which were not the same ones I had felt under me when I sat down. Don Juan was just behind me, to my right. I tried to turn around to face him, but he forced my head to remain straight. And then I saw two dark figures, like two thin tree trunks, right in front of me. I stared at them open-mouthed. They were not as tall as in my dreams. They had shrunk to half their size. Instead of being shapes of opaque luminosity, they were now two condensed, dark, almost black, menacing sticks. "Get up and grab one of them," Don Juan ordered me, "and don't let go, no matter how it shakes you." I definitely did not want to do anything of the sort, but some unknown drive made me stand up against my will. I had at that moment the clear realization that I would end up doing what he had ordered me to, although I had no conscious intention of doing so. Mechanically, I advanced toward the two figures, my heart pounding nearly out of my chest. I grabbed the one to my right. What I felt was an electric discharge that almost made me drop the dark figure. Don Juan's voice came to me as if he had been yelling from a distance away. "You drop it and you're done for," he said. I held on to the figure, which twirled and shook. Not like a massive animal would, but like something quite fluffy and light, although strongly electrical. We rolled and turned on the sand of the gully for quite some time. It gave me jolt after jolt of some sickening electric current. I thought it was sickening because I fancied it to be different from the energy I had always encountered in our daily world. When it hit my body, it tickled me and made me yell and growl like an animal. Not in anguish, but in a strange anger. It finally became a still, almost solid form under me. It lay inert. I asked Don Juan if it was dead, but I did not hear my voice. "Not a chance," said someone laughing. Someone who was not Don Juan. "You've just depleted its energy charge. But don't get up yet. Lie there just a moment longer." I looked at Don Juan with a question in my eyes. He was examining me with great curiosity. Then he helped me up. The dark figure remained on the ground. I wanted to ask Don Juan if the dark figure was all right. Again, I could not voice my question. Then I did something extravagant. I took it all for real. Up to that moment, something in my mind was preserving my rationality by taking what was happening as a dream induced by Don Juan's machinations. I went to the figure on the ground and tried to lift it up. I could not put my arms around it because it had no mass. I became disoriented. The same voice, which was not Don Juan's, told me to lie down on top of the inorganic being. I did it, and both of us got up in one motion. The inorganic being, like a dark shadow, attached to me. It gently separated me. It gently separated from me and disappeared, leaving me with an extremely pleasant feeling of completeness. It took me more than 24 hours to regain total control of my faculties. I slept most of the time. Don Juan checked me from time to time by asking me the same question. Was the inorganic being's energy like fire or like water? My throat seemed scorched. I could not tell him that the energy jolts I had felt were like jets of electrified water. I've never felt jets of electrified water in my life. I'm not sure if it is possible to produce them or to feel them, but that was the image playing in my mind every time Don Juan asked his key question. Don Juan was asleep when I finally knew I was completely recovered. Knowing that his question was of great importance, I woke him up and told him what I had felt. You are not going to have helping friends among the inorganic beings, but relationships of annoying dependence, he stated. Be extremely careful. Watery, inorganic beings are more given to excesses. The old sorcerers believed that they were more loving, more capable of imitating, or perhaps even having feelings, as opposed to the fiery ones who were thought to be more serious, more contained than the others, but also more pompous. What's the meaning of all this for me, Don Juan? The meaning is too vast to discuss at this time. My recommendation is that you vanquish fear from your dreams and from your life in order to safeguard your unity. The inorganic being you depleted of energy and then recharged again was thrilled out of its candle-like shape with it. It'll come to you for more. Why didn't you stop me, Don Juan? You didn't give me time. Besides, you didn't even hear me shouting at you to leave the inorganic being on the ground. You should have lectured me beforehand, the way you always do, about all the possibilities. I didn't know all the possibilities. In matters of the inorganic beings, I am nearly a novice. I refused that part of the sorcerer's knowledge on the ground that it is too cumbersome and capricious. I don't want to be at the mercy of any entity, organic or inorganic. That was the end of our exchange. I should have been worried because of his definitely negative reaction, but I was not. I somehow was certain that whatever I had done was all right. I continued my dreaming practices without any interference from the inorganic beings. Chapter 4. The Fixation of the Assemblage Point. Since our agreement had been to discuss dreaming only when Don Juan considered it necessary, I rarely asked him about it, and never insisted on continuing my questions beyond a certain point. I was more than eager, therefore, to listen to him whenever he decided to take up the subject. His comments or discussions on dreaming were invariably cushioned in other topics of his teachings, and they were always suddenly and abruptly brought in. We were engaged in some unrelated conversation once, while I was visiting with him in his house, when without any preamble he said that by means of their dreaming contacts with inorganic beings, the old sorcerers became immensely well-versed in the manipulation of the assemblage point, a vast and ominous subject. I immediately grabbed the opportunity and asked Don Juan for an estimate of the time when the old sorcerers might have lived. At various opportunities before, I had asked the same question, but he never gave me a satisfactory answer. I was confident, however, that at the moment, perhaps because he had brought up the subject himself, he might be willing to oblige me. A most trying subject, he said. The way he said it made me believe he was discarding my question. I was quite surprised when he continued talking. I'll tax your rationality as much as the topic of inorganic beings. By the way, what do you think about them now? I have let my opinions rest, I said. I can't afford to think one way or another. My answer delighted him. He laughed and commented on his own fears of and aversions to the inorganic beings. They have never been my cup of tea, he said. Of course, the main reason was my fear of them. I was unable to get over it when I had to, and then it became fixed. Do you fear them now, Don Juan? It's not quite fear I feel, but revulsion. I don't want any part of them. Is there any particular reason for this revulsion? The best reason in the world. We are antithetical. They love slavery, and I love freedom. They love to buy, and I don't sell. I became inexplicably agitated and brusquely told him that the subject was so far-fetched for me that I could not take it seriously. He stared at me smiling and said, "The best thing to do with inorganic beings is what you do. Deny their existence, but visit with them regularly and maintain that you are dreaming, and in dreaming anything is possible. This way you don't commit yourself." I felt strangely guilty, although I could not figure out why. I felt compelled to ask, What are you referring to, Don Juan? To your visits with the inorganic beings, he replied dryly. Are you kidding? What visits? I didn't want to discuss this, but I think it's time I tell you what the nagging voice you heard, reminding you to fix your dreaming attention on the items of your dreams, was the voice of an inorganic being. I thought Don Juan was completely irrational. I became so irritated that I even yelled at him. He laughed at me and asked me to tell him about my irregular dreaming sessions. That request surprised me. I had never mentioned to anyone that every so often I used to zoom out of a dream, pulled by a given item. But instead of my changing dreams, as I should have, the total mood of the dream changed, and I would find myself in a dimension unknown to me. I soared in it, directed by some invisible guide, which made me twirl around and around. I always awoke from one of these dreams, still twirling, and I continued tossing and turning for a long time before I fully woke up. Those are bona fide meetings you are having with your inorganic being friends, Don Juan said. I did not want to argue with him, but neither did I want to agree. I remained silent. I had forgotten my question about the old sorcerers, but Don Juan picked up the subject again. My understanding is that the old sorcerers existed, perhaps, as far back as 10,000 years ago, he said, smiling and watching my reaction. Basing my response on current archaeological data on the migration of Asiatic nomadic tribes to the Americas, I said that I believed his date was incorrect. 10,000 years was too far back. You have your knowledge, and I have mine, he said. My knowledge is that the old sorcerers ruled for 4,000 years, from 7,000 to 3,000 years ago. 3,000 years ago, they went to nothing. And from then on, sorcerers have been regrouping, restructuring what was left of the old ones. How can you be so sure about your dates? I asked. How can you be so sure about yours? He retorted. I told him that archaeologists have foolproof methods to establish the date of past cultures. Again, he retorted that sorcerers have foolproof methods of their own. I'm not trying to be contrary or argue you down, he continued. But someday soon you may be able to ask someone who knows for sure. No one can know this for sure, Don Juan. This is another of those impossible things to believe. But there is somebody who can verify all this. You'll meet that person someday. Come on, Don Juan, you've got to be joking. Who can verify what happened 7,000 years ago? Very simple. One of the old sorcerers we've been talking about. The one I met. He's the one who told me all about the old sorcerers. I hope you remember what I'm going to tell you about that particular man. He is the key to many of our endeavors, and he's also the one you have to meet. I told Don Juan that I was hanging on every word he said, even though I did not understand what he was saying. He accused me of humoring him and not believing a word about the old sorcerers. I admitted that in my state of daily consciousness, of course, I had not believed those far-fetched stories. But neither had I in the second attention, although there I should have had a different reaction. Only when you ponder what I said does it become a far-fetched story, he remarked. If you don't involve your common sense, it remains purely a matter of energy. What did you say, Don Juan? That I'm going to meet one of the old sorcerers? Why did you say? Because you are. It is vital that the two of you meet someday. But for the moment, just let me tell you another far-fetched story about one of the Naguals of my line, the Nagual Sebastian. Don Juan told me then that the Nagual Sebastian had been a sexton in a church in southern Mexico around the beginning of the 18th century. In his account, Don Juan stressed how sorcerers, past or present, seek and find refuge in established institutions, such as the church. It was his idea that because of their superior discipline, sorcerers are trustworthy employees, and that they are avidly sought by institutions that are always in dire need of such persons. Don Juan maintained that as long as no one is aware of the sorcerer's doings, their lack of ideological sympathies makes them appear as model workers. Don Juan continued his story and said that one day, while Sebastian was performing his duties as a sexton, a strange man came to the church, an old Indian who seemed to be ill. In a weak voice, he told Sebastian that he needed help. The Nagual thought that the Indian wanted the parish priest, but the man, making a great effort, addressed the Nagual. In a harsh and direct tone, he told him that he knew that Sebastian was not only a sorcerer, but a Nagual. Sebastian, quite alarmed by this sudden turn of events, pulled the Indian aside and demanded an apology. The man replied that he was not there to apologize, but to get specialized help. He needed, he said, to receive the Nagual's energy in order to maintain his life, which he assured Sebastian had spanned thousands of years, but at the moment was ebbing away. Sebastian, who was a very intelligent man, unwilling to pay attention to such nonsense, urged the Indian to stop clowning around. The old man became angry and threatened Sebastian with exposing him and his group to the ecclesiastical authorities if he did not comply with his request. Don Juan reminded me that those were the times when the ecclesiastical authorities were brutally and systematically eradicating heretical practices among the Indians of the New World. The man's threat was not something to be taken lightly. The Nagual and his group were indeed in mortal danger. Sebastian asked the Indian how he could give him energy. The man explained that Naguals, by means of their discipline, gain a peculiar energy that they store in their bodies, and that he would get it painlessly from Sebastian's energy center on his navel. In return for it, Sebastian would get not only the opportunity to continue his activities unscathed, but also a gift of power. The knowledge that he was being manipulated by the old Indian did not sit right with the Nagual, but the man was inflexible and left him no alternative but to comply with his request. Don Juan assured me that the old Indian was not exaggerating about his claims at all. He turned out to be one of the sorcerers of ancient times, one of those known as the Death Defiers. He had apparently survived to the present by manipulating his assemblage point in ways that only he knew about. Don Juan said that what transpired between Sebastian and that man later became the ground for an agreement that had bound all 6 Naguals who followed Sebastian. The Death Defier kept his word. In exchange for energy from every one of those men, he made a donation to the giver, a gift of power. Sebastian had to accept such a gift, although reluctantly. He had been concerned and had no other choice. All the other Naguals who followed him, however, gladly and proudly accepted their gifts. Don Juan concluded his story, saying that over time, the Death Defier came to be known as the Tenant. And for over 200 years, the Naguals of Don Juan's line honored that binding agreement, creating a symbiotic relationship that changed the course and final goal of their lineage. Don Juan did not care to explain the story any further, and I was left with a strange sensation of truthfulness, which was more bothersome to me than I could have imagined. How did he get to live that long? I asked. No one knows, Don Juan replied. All we've known about him for generations is what he tells us. The Death Defier is the one I asked about the old sorcerers, and he told me that they were at their peak 3,000 years ago. How do you know he was telling the truth? I asked. Don Juan shook his head in amazement, if not revulsion. When you're facing that inconceivable unknown out there, he said, pointing all around him, you don't fool around with petty lies. Petty lies are only for people who have never witnessed what's out there, waiting for them. What's waiting for us out there, Don Juan? His answer, a seemingly innocuous phrase, was more terrifying to me than if he had described the most horrendous thing. Something utterly impersonal, he said. He must have noticed that I was coming apart. He made me change levels of awareness to make my fright vanish. A few months later, my dreaming practices took a strange turn. I began to get in my dreams replies to questions I was planning to ask Don Juan. The most impressive part of this oddity was that it quickly lapsed into my waking hours. And one day, while I was sitting at my desk, I got a reply to an unvoiced question about the realness of inorganic beings. I had seen inorganic beings in my dreams so many times I had begun to think of them as real. I reminded myself I had even touched one in a state of semi-normal consciousness in the Sonoran Desert. And my dreams had been periodically deviated to views of worlds I seriously doubted could have been products of my mentality. I wished to give Don Juan my best shot in terms of a concise query. So I molded a question in my mind. If one is to accept that inorganic beings are as real as people, where, in the physicality of the universe, is the realm in which they exist? After formulating the question to myself, I heard a strange laughter. just as I had the day I wrestled with the inorganic being. Then a man's voice answered me. That realm exists in a particular position of the assemblage point. It said, just like your world exists in the habitual position of the assemblage point. The last thing I wanted was to enter into a dialogue with a disembodied voice. So I stood up and ran out of my house. The thought occurred to me that I was losing my mind. Another worry to add to my collection of worries. The voice had been so clear and authoritative that it not only intrigued me, but it terrified me. I waited with great trepidation for oncoming barrages of that voice, but the event was never repeated. At the first opportunity I had, I consulted with Don Juan. He was not impressed in the least. You must understand once and for all that things like this are very normal in the life of a sorcerer, he said. You are not going mad. You are simply hearing the voice of the dreaming emissary. Upon crossing the first or second gate of dreaming, dreamers reach a threshold of energy and begin to see things or to hear voices. Not really plural voices, but a singular voice. Sorcerers call it the voice of the dreaming emissary.